From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what we're working on for you over the next 60 minutes. It's a trade pact more than 2 decades old, and now that renegotiations are underway, there's a great divide with ag businesses on edge.
There's a lot at stake as NAFTA renegotiations begin. We'll be in Mexico for a special report.
From potatoes to beets to hay, Idaho farmers are diversifying to dodge the economic headwinds.
I think that's how you're going to survive.
And it's growing demand for hay equipment driving equipment trends in the area. And in John's world,
infrastructure, the perennial plea.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Chevy Silverado, high-strength steel for high-strength dependability.
Now for the news that moved the markets this week. Less than a week after USDA shocked the market with larger than expected production numbers, the agency boosting U.S. corn condition ratings while trimming a few points off of conditions in a major corn growing state. Monday's crop progress report shows a 2-point gain in overall crop conditions for corn. 62% is rated good to excellent. Now, most of the top corn states saw a slight improvement, but Iowa saw a 3-point slide. 61% is rated good to excellent. That's 9 straight weeks where Iowa corn conditions have dropped. On June 19th, it was 80% good to excellent. Now moving to soybeans, there's a 1-point drop off this week. 59% is good to excellent. We see a downgrade in Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, and also Ohio. And in the South, cotton conditions climbed 4 points this week with 61% good to excellent. And the peanut crop showing strength with 80% good to excellent, up a point from last week. Well, farmers in the South are taking in record-shattering yields. USDA's latest report projects yields in Louisiana to climb 27 bushels per acre over last year to 192 bushels per acre. It's favorable conditions to start the growing season and a mild summer, helping push yields higher this year.
Central Louisiana, south, doesn't have much irrigation, and then when that yield monitor is well over 200 bushels and not being irrigated, you can get excited really quick.
Fromey says non-irrigated corn yields are yielding about the same as irrigated crops this year. Well, that drought in Iowa, it's eating away at crop conditions, but check out the latest drought monitor. In Iowa, extreme drought entering the picture. That's the red spots in the south central portion of the state. Moderate drought, or that tan shade, growing 4 points. In Montana, dryness grew nearly 10 points with drought now covering more than 97% of the state. Moderate drought jumped 9 points. But the biggest relief resides in Oklahoma. Check out the difference in just a week. Severe and moderate drought wiped off the map, an abnormally dry area improving from 40% to 14% of the state. Meanwhile, the drought having a ripple effect on cash flow, with more than half of ag bankers in a recent survey showing impacts from the drought this year. The most recent Rural Main Street Index came in at 42.2. That's slightly higher than July's 40.7 reading, but still below growth neutral. It's the same story with economic weakness stemming from lower commodity prices, but drought is a major concern, with 57.6 of bankers saying drought is having a negative impact on ag in their region. Well, a bumper crop in Brazil means major ag growing areas are running out of storage space. It's a record soybean crop combined with an impressive safrinha corn crop, causing the issue with corn now piling on soybeans, with farmers reluctant to sell due to lower prices. Now storage facilities worry there won't be any space for the 17 to 18 soybean crop. All right, those are the headlines. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with weather. Mike, the Southern Plains seen some nice rains this week, and I know a lot of soybean fields could use some of that rain as well. So who do you think gets rain over the next 7 days?
Thanks, Tyne. It looks like with the jet stream level, we're going to see a little more moisture scattered anyway across the northern half of the country, with a little bit less down south. And of course, you can see the drought monitor really pretty much non-existent in our southern counties or southern states. Off to the northeast, we've seen that drought expand into parts of Iowa, as you can see, the one over the Dakotas and eastern Montana. A month ago, we were already seeing it very dry in those areas. It turned into an exceptional drought in parts of Montana and North Dakota. And like I said, said, just in the last couple of weeks, we've expanded that a little bit into Iowa. So let's go day by day. We'll start on Monday. Scattered showers and thunderstorms along this first front from the northeastern plain states all the way down through the southwest. Hit and miss activity then through the southeastern portions of the country. Dry and warm in the east. Taking a look at Wednesday then, that first front heading off the northeast coast. Showers and thunderstorms there into parts of the southeast. And then another little slow mover kind of diving through the western plains will be producing showers and thunderstorms from the western Dakotas. Good news there. Into parts of Nebraska and Kansas. Hit and miss activity in the desert southwest. And taking a look at Friday then, high pressure builds back in. This is another cool air mass coming into the Great Lakes in the northeast. Scattered thunderstorms along a stationary front in the southeast into the south central portions of the plain states. Hit and miss activity in the southwest, and also that next cold front coming into the Pacific Northwest for a change, with some areas of rain as well. We'll take a look at your longer range forecast in our next half hour.
Thanks, Mike. Well, if you're planning on attending Farm Progress Show this year in Decatur, Illinois, come see us. Our marketing roundtable will be live from the channel tent on Tuesday at noon. Come join us to talk markets and have lunch. Well, next up, we're on the road this week, this time to the DeKalb and Asgrow Field Day in West Lafayette, Indiana. Brian Bastine and Bob Utterback dissect the markets next.
U.S. Farm Report on the Road is brought to you by DeKalb Asgrow. Visit DeKalbAsgrow.com to see the difference proven performance and leading innovation can make on your farm.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Well, as promised, we're on the road with our friends from Northern Indiana, DeKalb and Asgrow team at their field day here in West Lafayette. A good turnout, so thanks for the invite this week. Let's start off talking about old crop. You know, I know we have a lot of viewers out there who are still setting on a lot of old crop corn just because they have not had as many opportunities to market that grain this year. So if they have old crop, Brian, what's your advice at this point?
We're really encouraging your viewers time to get a floor underneath the market, get control of the old crop, because there's so much old crop out there relative to normal this time of year. The market knows it's out there, so it's been weighing on the market. Get control of your old crop, get a floor in place. One of the things we can consider is to buy a call option to give yourself upside potential, but it's imperative to get a floor in place.
Okay, you're saying one option is buy a call option. What do you think at this point, Bob?
I think the key is a lot of people are thinking about deferred pricing where they deliver the grain, give the control to the elevator, and stay flat to market. But that's like playing poker and giving your competition the money to play against you. I think if you're going to do it, you need to cut it clean, basically sell the cash and buy it on a call, but I would want to buy an in-the-money call. Or you got to sell the carry, go out there and sell. Right now the market's paying you almost 3 cents a month clear to DC18. Sell the carry and be satisfied. But the key is, I think we're close to a flat price row, but it's going to be quite a while before we really get any significant flat price recovery, which will probably be next spring, summer. And if we don't watch ourselves, we're going to end up next summer just like we was this year, with a lot of old crop inventory around, everybody waiting for a weather scare to bail them out, and end up with less than positive results.
Yeah, well, we have this bearish tone in the market, especially after this August USDA report. And I'm not here to blame USDA at this point, but at 169.5, that yield, I mean, at this point in the game, how big of a chance do we have that they significantly reduce that 169.5 national corn yield?
Every year is a different time. That's certainly a starting point for 2017. I think what we got to do is remember that that's only a starting point. Yield can change quite a bit from here. Still, you want to be prepared. What we've encouraged our growers to think about is, rather than react to the market, be prepared for the market ahead of time. Be prepared ahead of time, because a lot can change, both the upside and downside.
Yeah, but I mean, realistically, how much do you think they could come off? I mean, if we're starting at 169.5, we're starting really high. I mean, 166, 165, you think they won't go much lower than that?
I think at this point, the trade is probably factoring in something closer to 166, 165. At this point, we just got to let this play out. I do think that that's a realistic possibility at this point.
The 93 model is the best, I think, guide. And I think the September report will be a bullish event. So bears, that if you're short the market, you need to get to the back end. If your feed buyers need to get covered. But the point is, the difference between 166 and 162 is probably between 395 to 450 corn. And I don't think 450 corn is in the makeup unless you want to talk a very positive bean outlook, positive wheat. So these 450 bulls out here, I think, are really talking their position more than the fundamentals. You've got to prove this yield down, and I think it's going to take at least 2 reports before you can get a shot of getting stocks below 1718.
Yeah, you say a bullish report, but looking at where we are at prices today, I mean, when you say bullish, how bullish?
I think $3.95, $3.94 corn is it unless we can get beans. Beans really ties our hands. If we can't get beans to rally, corn can't really go to 450, 475, which I think a lot of people in trade want to argue with a 161, 160 corn to it. So if we're 165, 166, and beans yield is at 49, we're stuck.
Speaking of beans, I was in Central Illinois this week at the Premier Cooperative event, and they did their own crop tour, and they came out with yields that were 15% below last year, and that's pretty consistent what I'm hearing from Central Illinois. However, for their soybean crop, they said, Tyne, if we get these rains this week, if we get these rains next week, our beans can potentially be better than last year. So if we have these rains, if we see higher soybean yields, not going to do the markets any favors. You know, how likely is it that we could see corn actually rally and soybeans go lower?
I have to agree with Bob. There's a tendency for the corn and beans to move in tandem together, not necessarily lockstep, but to move in tandem together. And over time, you do rarely see one go sharply higher and the other not follow suit, and vice versa. So I think there is some relationship there that would hold back corn, if you will. Yeah. And if bean yields are as high as what some people are saying, that might be a cap on the corn market too.
All right, we need to take a quick break, but we're going to talk about the Farm Journal Crop Tour next week. Does the trade even care at this point? What comes out of Crop Tour? We'll talk about that when we come back on U.S. Farm Report.
U.S. Farm Report on the Road is brought to you by DeKalb Asgrow. Visit DeKalbAsgrow.com to see the difference proven performance and leading innovation can make on your farm.
Welcome back again. We're at the field day in Northern Indiana with the DeKalb and Asgrow Group. Big thanks for having us out this week. Farm Journal Crop Tour, formerly known as Pro Farmer Crop Tour, happens next week. A highly anticipated crop tour every year. But looking at USDA and this 169.5 and this high production number that they came out with in August, do you think the trade even cares at this point what happens each day on Crop Tour?
I do think the trade cares, Tyne, because the Farm Journal Crop Tour has an established track record. They're well trained. I know the folks who organize that tour, and it is something not only domestically or that the U.S. looks at, but also worldwide. It's something that is looked at. Now, again, it's not a perfect tour, and no tour is, but it's definitely something that's closely watched.
But at the same time, they start in Ohio. You know, we started in South Dakota, 2 kind of hard-hit areas when we look at some of these yields. So, I mean, do you expect that we're going to kind of see some not so favorable numbers to start out?
I think the market bought corn last week at 64, 65, wanting to be bullish short-term going this report. And I think the market wants to argue a short-term bounce from the report that will be indicative of the 165. But as Brian said, this is just it's got some objective studies. It's the first objective count. But the market's not going to be able to go nuts. So I think it'll be disappointed that there's no follow-through, then we'll fade into the Memorial Day weekend. One of the big things what I think is impacting the market that I can't trace down, there was a lot of DP contracts made back in April, May, June, where farmers delivered the corn to the elevator, stayed unpriced against the September corn, and they had to deliver against that contract in September. And that's the commercials have to sell the market, and that's getting flushed to the market right now. I think once that flushes through, then the market will be able to recover into September, getting prepared for the September supply demand. So we're in a period of choppiness, but I think corn has got the downside. The question, can beans rally?
Right.
That's
right.
the real.
Yeah.
That's what I think the real commodity we need to watch.
Well, let's say Crop Tour comes out next week and says, you know what, USDA was too high in these numbers. Yield could be lower. And then let's say then USDA does continue to reveal that maybe this corn crop is not as big as what they originally thought. Let's say we get down to like that 166 yield. Do you think that's enough to kind of reduce this 2 billion bushel carryout number that we have? Can we get under that 2 billion mark?
It's certainly possible. I think that the one thing that's going to cap the market to some degree is the export market this fall is going to be much weaker than a year ago. We do have to turn the table, if you will, on demand, and I think this fall's export demand with that huge crop in Brazil and Argentina is something that's going to weigh on a rally attempt.
Yeah, speaking of Brazil, read a story this week where that the farmers just are not encouraged to sell right now. So they're setting on their major soybean crop, and then now the safrinha corn crop that's so huge, they're piling that on top of the soybeans, and they may not have enough storage space next year for the soybean crop. So just a huge crop out there that seems like it's just going to kind of be a wet blanket on the market.
Taking the words out of my mouth. It's just that's the wet blanket on the domestically market. So that is a strong argument for selling the carry. But farmers, in my experience historically, will put the corn in the bin unpriced because the flat price is below their total cost of operation, and they're going to be long the front end. And what the risk is that the back end, which is carry, the back end kind of slips and the front end comes up. But when they put storage costs after 9 months, they're going to be worse off taking the grain out next summer if the market doesn't have a weather scare bin. So I think you should sell the carry. And if you want to be bullish, flat price, you organize that with a call position in the money call on the paper.
You mentioned demand. Let's say USDA is right. Let's say this 169.5 yield is right, their production is right. How big of an increase do we need to see in demand to offset it and kind of lift prices moving forward?
Well, the market's going to feel heavy if 169 is truly the size of the crop. Unless we run into some weather problems with South America for next year's crop, I think our demand base is strong domestically here, ethanol and feed, but down the road, I think for the first half of this crop year, the export market's going to feel kind of weak. So the market might have a struggle if that crop is really that big.
Not the news we wanted to hear. All right, we need to take a quick break, but we'll be back on U.S. Farm Report, so don't go anywhere.
Visit FarmJournalPro.com. Trusted analysis, professional insight. FarmJournalPro.com.
All right, to wrap up our marketing roundtable, time now for closing thoughts. Brian?
Get control of your crop. That means remaining old crop unpriced bushels and new crop. Get a floor underneath the market. Give yourself flexibility if these yields surprise us to the downside here in the U.S. to be able to be a participant if we do see a rally this fall. But get control. You'll feel better than you do right now.
All right, Bob?
Feed buyers need to be thinking between now and this mid-September time period to get their feed needs for next spring, summer locked in. Hog producers need to be for the fourth quarter selling hogs to protect the downside risk.
All right. Thanks, Bob. And thanks, Brian. We appreciate it. Stay with us. We'll be back with more U.S. Farm Report in just a moment.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by John Deere. Where can you find the most comprehensive inventory of John Deere certified pre-owned tractors, combines, and sprayers? MachineFinder.com. Sometimes the best new addition to your fleet isn't new.
Investment in infrastructure is something the ag community has lobbied for a long time, and the push for money for waterways, roads, and bridges is just getting stronger. Here's John Phipps.
Well, hope springs eternal in agriculture as the budget talks grind along in Washington. Of course, farmers are pushing hard for money to make our safety net more generous. And there is one perennial plea, and that's for funds to rebuild our infrastructure, specifically roads and bridges, but also locks and ports and all types of facilities that could help move ag commodities. I certainly agree with the assertion that our support systems for transportation, communication, and public services could be better, even much better. But I'm beginning to be a little bit skeptical of the urgency that we seem to put into those pleas. To my knowledge, our infrastructure has been labeled nearly unacceptable for my entire career. And yet, during that same time, we've somehow managed to grow and ship ever larger amounts of grain and protein. While I know that we all really mean my road and my bridge when we demand infrastructure improvements, we also dream of higher grain bids that would come about with major upgrades like dredging rivers or new locks. It seems, too, that every year professional engineers grade our infrastructure, and I can't remember ever seeing a grade I would have been happy to take home to show my parents. Some way, though, this D+ system gets the job done without Brazil-type truck lines or bridge collapses. Maybe asking civil engineers whether we need them to build new roads and bridges is kind of like asking your barber if you need a haircut. I know we are running on borrowed time, but constantly predicting imminent collapse hasn't been all that effective or accurate. At any rate, if we have learned nothing from legislative action in the United States in this century, it is that action is usually taken in response to a crisis that has happened, not one that we could avoid.
Thanks, John. Well, still to come, all the hype around NAFTA coming to a head as leaders from all three nations start negotiations on a new trade pact. After the break, Clinton takes us south of the border to see why these trade talks have businesses on edge.
From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. We have much more ahead. Concerns climb in Mexico as NAFTA negotiations heat up this week. Diversity is how local farmers say they're surviving the economic times in Idaho, and it's that diversity driving equipment trends. And in customer support, an unanswered question about dicamba. Now for the headlines. The official start to NAFTA negotiations kicked off Wednesday, and only a few hours into it, signs showed trade talks were already off to a rocky start. President Donald Trump calling for major changes to the trade pact more than 2 decades old, while officials from both Canada and Mexico want tweaks. The American Farm Bureau, along with the Canadian Federation of Agriculture and Mexico's Ag Association, sending a letter to government officials urging them to modernize the agreement, not dismantle it. Looking at it by numbers, Canada is the number 2 buyer of overall ag goods, and Mexico ranks 3rd on that list. But a grain buyer in Mexico telling U.S. Farm Report the uncertainty surrounding NAFTA is impacting what he buys right now.
Are you waiting to decide on October?
Yes, usually by now we have our grain purchases all the way through December. But as negotiations start, we're just waiting to see what each government's position is going to be in relationship to the agreement, specifically as it pertains to agriculture.
Meanwhile, one of the biggest rubs within NAFTA is over Chapter 19, a dispute resolution within NAFTA. Both Mexico and Canada looking to amplify the measure, while the U.S. is striving to eliminate it. Farm Journal Washington correspondent Jim Wiesmeyer says Chapter 19 deals with illegal subsidies and dumping.
It allows them to seek a review under a binational NAFTA panel regarding the 2 countries in dispute. In this case, let's say it's U.S. and Canada. Now, they include the trade experts from both countries, and then they reevaluate the legal basis for any imposed measures against a country.
The U.S. doesn't have a good track record, losing more than half of past Chapter 19 cases. Instead, the administration pushing to resort back to an old trade remedy called snapback.
That calls for increasing tariffs on imports if they're projected to injure or threaten to injure a U.S. domestic industry. Now, I think Mexico will also fight this because it would lead to a lot of cases, I think, primarily in the produce area where there's been charges of anti-dumping areas.
Wiesmeyer says negotiations regarding trade disputes is something to watch, with Canada already drawing a line in the sand, saying they'll walk away from NAFTA if Chapter 19 is eliminated. Well, as NAFTA negotiations begin, grain buyers and end users in Mexico are paying attention. Last week, Clinton Griffiths traveled to Mexico as a guest of the U.S. Grains Council to visit with America's customers. And right now, they say any future plans are on hold as tensions surrounding negotiations heat up.
I'm Clinton Griffiths reporting.
All right, thanks, Clinton. And we'll have more in-depth coverage of NAFTA negotiations next week on U.S. Farm Report. Well, that's it for the news. Let's check in with meteorologist Mike Hoffman with a longer-range look at weather. Mike, harvest is in full swing down south.
And that area is just going to pretty much stay the same, Tyne, because we see a big ridge still sitting over the southern half of the country, especially over the plain states. Putting this map into motion, though, as we head into this week, you'll notice how the ridge starts to go back to the west again. You know, we've been in this transition now for a week and a half or so, but it looks like the models are trying to take us back, at least temporarily, to the same pattern we were having there for a month and a half, with a trough digging into the Great Lakes in the northeast, ridge out west. That's by Wednesday. Then as we head through the end of the week, you can see that kind of sticks around with a trough trying to come into the Pacific Northwest, and that may shove everything a little farther east as we head through next weekend. Let's take a look at the 30-day outlook then. Below normal temperatures expected right through the middle of the country. Above normal in the east, much of Canada, and the west. Precipitation over the next 30 days above normal from Kansas and Missouri all the way southward into Texas and the southern Mississippi Valley. Near normal in most of the Corn Belt, Great Lakes, below normal in the northwest. Tyne?
Thanks, Mike. Well, up next, a viewer has another question about a potential issue he sees with large use of dicamba. We'll do that after the break. Last week, John spent quite a bit of time discussing the issues surrounding dicamba this year, but that left a viewer with one question unanswered.
Kevin Swansea from Maine, New York, brings up an interesting point about the dicamba debate. Everyone seems to be talking about how crops are impacted. I even heard one say the biggest question is what effect does it have on crop yield? But I have yet to hear any of these ag shows talk or even ask the question, how does dicamba drift affect human life? This is a really good question, and you're right, we have overlooked it. So let's throw a few facts at it. The first thing you need to know is dicamba is an old chemical. It was discovered in 1942, and it's been used as a weed killer for decades. This means there has been ample time to detect any longer-term toxicity problems, and none have been identified. Dicamba works by interrupting the growth process of cells in plants, similar to that old standby 2,4-D. This disruption process is ineffective in animals, which means dicamba has very low toxicity for animals and humans. Toxicity is measured by experimentation on rats, usually where they are fed increasing doses until they can determine at what level 50% of the rats die. This number is, well, this is kind of gruesome, but this number is called LD50, where LD stands for lethal dose. The higher the number, the better. It's kind of anti-logical there. I do not use the word safe when talking about hazards of any kind because it implies an absolute that simply doesn't exist. For example, there's an LD50 for water, and we think of it as safe. What I like to do is compare the toxicity to other common chemicals, which leads us to this chart for ingestion, which means eating. Dicamba is about 4 times less toxic than aspirin. I also included glyphosate, which is Roundup, as well. It is almost 30 times less toxic than aspirin. As for skin absorption and inhalation, dicamba is rated very low toxicity, and keep in mind that drift vapors contain only minuscule amounts of dicamba. There have been no carcinogenic hazards detected, and it is not an endocrine disruptor. In short, the same properties that make many plants exquisitely sensitive to dicamba, making it an extremely low hazard for animals and humans. This is the biggest reason why the media are not talking about dicamba safety, because it simply is pretty safe. And it's not because it's being suppressed by the government or manufacturers.
Thanks, John. And if you have a question or a comment, you can email John at mailbag@usfarmreport.com. Up next, we're out to Idaho, where diversity is helping farmers thrive. We're on the road with Machinery Pete next. We continue our On the Road with Machinery Pete series, this time traveling the most miles we have yet to American Falls, Idaho. Stoats Equipment spans from Arizona and as far north as Idaho, and they tell us it's diversity in the land that allows growers there to thrive. Now, Stotz also says sales of lower horsepower equipment has been a big surprise this year, something Machinery Pete is also seeing. Well, up next, Machinery Pete rejoins us for Tractor Tales. This week's Country Church Salute goes to the St. Stephen's Catholic Church in Indian Creek, Missouri. That's just south of Monroe City. They tell us their congregation holds the Swinky Picnic, the oldest picnic in the state of Missouri. They just held this year's event as it's held each year in July, rain or shine. Stay with us from the farm next, where we talk to the solar eclipse with Mike Hoffman. Welcome back. Well, coming up this week, the total solar eclipse happening on Monday. And many of you will have the best seat in the house in rural America. But the question is now, Mike, what are the chances that our viewers are actually going to see it?
Well, if you happen to live in the western states, you have a very good chance, 80 to 100%. Now, this is a tough forecast still, a day or two ahead here. Southeast will be those hit and miss thunderstorms, so 60 to 80%. I would put the lowest chance, but I wouldn't give up on that possibility across northern Missouri, northeastern Kansas, southeastern Nebraska. But that's just with the storm system moving through there.
And Mike, I know I was in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and they told me hotels were sold out. They have people coming in from international areas just to see this eclipse. I can't imagine spending the money, getting here, and not being able to see
No, that would not be good at all, but
unfortunately
it is going to happen to some folks.
And tune in next week. We will be on the road from the annual Farm Journal Crop Tour, so we'll look at yields and different things from the field. We'll do that next week on the show.
And for all of us at U.S. Farm Report, thank you for joining us.
Be sure to tune in next week as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.